So, a new controversial topic that's hit the headlines, especially in Johannesburg, is the fact that there's a municipal bylaw that was promulgated towards the end of February 2025, just regarding how CCTV cameras are going to be dealt with through this regulatory framework. So, what does this mean? Now, CCTV cameras that are internal and they're used for private purposes are still the property owners, but what the city of Joburg is proposing through this bylaw is that any CCTV camera that has a view of a public area, such as a street, which most CCTV cameras in Johannesburg do for security purposes. Now, these cameras cannot simply be erected and installed, they have to be applied for through the municipality. So that's the first obstacle that a property owner has to face, is prior to installing a CCTV camera, they have to apply for permission to the municipality in order to install it. If they do have one already, they need to have it approved. But either way, now there's a framework within which the installation takes place. Now, I'm not privy to what this fee would be. I would imagine there's always a small application fee that applies, but again, I suppose the word small is also relative depending on the property owner. But there is usually a fee, but sometimes also not just about the monetary costs, it's about the cost of time. And the reason I say this is, unfortunately, as we've experienced, the administrative process is not a speedy one. And generally speaking, as soon as, and I say this with all respect, bureaucracy is put into place, we tend to find that a simple application turns into months and months of waiting, lost paperwork, reapplication, resubmission of documents, a return on queries that just seem to be unreasonable. And unfortunately, this is something we have experienced through bureaucracy. We experience it through a lot of our government departments. And again, I understand the purpose of having certain rules put into place. What I fear is that the implementation of the rules are just not sustainable. So adding more and more rules, one on top of the other, is not going to help the already overburdened property owner or consumer, because if they simply cannot be carried out effectively, it just creates frustration as opposed to relief. From a purchasing perspective, I'm not 100% sure how the enactment or implementation of this bylaw is going to play out. I would imagine, yes, there is some kind of approval certificate that gets issued, and by virtue of that, I would imagine that a person buying a property would certainly want to have that certificate included in the sale. Yes, would it hamper the sale? I wouldn't be able to tell, because it really would depend on how long it takes to actually get the certificate. If the process is seamless and the certificate is acquired within a few days, then no, it shouldn't impact any property purchase whatsoever. But if it is a very difficult process, or it's made difficult through, again, bureaucracy, you may very well find that it may impact a buyer's decision, although I do highly doubt it. So my particular concern when it comes to this bylaw, and this is a concern, unfortunately, is that the bylaw requires the registration, as we've just discussed. However, it does do a little bit more than that, and it may not even be noticed by some persons because it's included in the miscellaneous provisions of the bylaw. But what it now also provides for is access to the CCTV footage by law enforcement authorities. Now, there are obviously, and as with any other legislation and laws, there are always exceptions and limitations as to when this can be requested. But what this actually does is allow law enforcement agencies to request. So it's not access. They do not have a live feed to the CCTV footage, but they are allowed to request that you provide it to them for specific purposes. And this would be obviously in the protection of life, prosecution of a crime, etc. So it's listed as bona fide purposes. So I wouldn't question the purposes necessarily, but it does do away with the need of a law enforcement agency to approach the courts for a warrant. And now they can simply come knocking on your door and asking for the footage, and you are obligated to give it to them. Now, this does raise privacy concerns because obviously a court, when requested to issue a warrant, had overview as to why this warrant was being requested and why the information or CCTV footage was actually being requested or asked for. Whereas now, the determination of whether it is in the protection of life or prosecution of a crime is now left squarely in the hands of the law enforcement agency that's knocking on your door, meaning that now it almost becomes up to you as the property owner, if you choose to resist, to approach the courts and resist, as opposed to in the past, where the courts were actually approached by the law enforcement agency who had to show good cause. So that's one of the concerns that I have, is that it almost feels like this onus has shifted. Another concern that I have is the distribution of the CCTV footage. Now, it's written in such a way when you read it for the first time, you get put at ease, because it almost makes it sound like the law enforcement agency can access it, but they're not allowed to share it with anyone else. But then as you read it again, you realize, hold on, but it's not just them, it's also us. So the, actually being able to share some of this footage online as to the commission of certain crimes, and we see it all the time. As South Africans, unfortunately, we live in a society that is rife with crime, and we often do actually get awareness of what happens by watching the CCTV footage with people getting hijacked outside their gates, or, whatever the case is. Now, it's not pleasant to watch, granted, but I have to admit that to a certain degree, it does make you aware of what situations to look out for and where to be more aware of your surroundings. But this is now seemingly being done away with, where the distribution has now become unlawful by both the law enforcement agency, which is understandable. They shouldn't be distributing this footage in any event, but also the actual owner of the footage that cannot simply distribute this as and when they like. And those are two things. There is more about this bylaw, and we can comment on whether this is even going to stand the test of time, to be honest with you, because I do see a lot of overreaching here. From what would typically be allowed in bylaws, especially when it comes to, in comparison with actual legislation, real legislation that exists governing this sort of topic. It does seem like this is a bylaw that seeks to cut through some of that more tenuous legislation. But that being said, until it is challenged, which it probably will be, this is something that's in place, or something that people need to look out for. And if for some reason it's not challenged to the full extent and it remains applicable, it's something that property owners should be very much aware of. For now, it's Joburg, and I do think that it'll probably stay Joburg for quite a while. And I suppose people are going to wait and see what happens. And see if it succeeds in Joburg, to see if there's any statistics that crime is reduced, to see if there's any abuses, and to see how this is challenged through the courts, if anyone actually stands up to the municipality when they come knocking on the door. Just to confirm with you, it is promulgated, so it is a bylaw. What you're waiting to see is how it's implemented. So, you're looking for the first real life scenarios of when an application is rejected, or when an application is accepted, or when a penalty is levied for failure to submit an application. You're waiting to see what happens when the municipality comes knocking and something's challenged. So you're waiting to see if a penalty is levied if a person posts their video on Facebook. So it is there. The question now is more around how people are going to interact with it.